Colorado Territory, 1875. The bitter wind swept across the wooden platform of Gold Creek's newly constructed train depot, carrying dust and broken promises in equal measure. Violet Blackburn clutched her threadbare shawl tighter, her 21-year-old frame shivering despite the late afternoon sun. Her chestnut hair, normally pinned in careful arrangements, had partially escaped its bonds during her hasty departure, framing a face too weary for its youth. The telegram crinkled in her pocket, the final betrayal. 2 years of correspondence, promises of marriage, and a future in San Francisco had evaporated with 15 cruel words. Cannot meet you, stop, position fell through, stop, do not come, stop, letter follows, stop. But the letter would find only an empty boarding house room. By then, Violet had already sold nearly everything to purchase her ticket west. A woman alone has no business surviving the frontier, her father had warned before disowning her for her foolish romantic notions. Now his harsh judgment echoed with terrible accuracy. She had precisely $3.42 remaining. The return fare to Philadelphia would cost $35 she didn't have. Next eastbound train leaves tomorrow at noon, miss. The station master had informed her with practiced indifference. You'll need to find accommodations for the night. His gaze had flicked meaningfully toward the saloon down the street, where women with no options often found temporary solutions that became permanent sentences. Violet straightened her spine. She might be stranded, but she wasn't broken, not yet. The frontier might devour the weak, but she refused to be consumed without a fight. Somehow, she would survive this humiliation, find work, and eventually make her way back east with dignity intact. Love was clearly a luxury the West couldn't afford her. Excuse me, miss? The voice came from behind her, deep but youthful. Violet turned, ready to rebuff whatever proposition might follow. Instead, she found herself looking up at a young cowboy, perhaps 25, tall and broad-shouldered, with weak gold hair visible beneath his pushed-back hat. His face was freshly shaved save for the lightest shadow of stubble along his jawline, and unlike many frontier men, his blue eyes held no predatory gleam, just genuine concern. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, removing his hat. "But I couldn't help noticing you've been sitting here since morning. Are you waiting for someone?" Something in his mannerly address and direct gaze made Violet hesitate before offering her customary rebuff. "I was," she admitted, "but they won't be coming." The words felt raw in her throat. The young man nodded, understanding without pressing. "Name's Grant Harlow, miss. I work the double rafter north of here." He gestured to a horse tethered nearby, a magnificent buckskin with a well-worn saddle that spoke of long days crossing open country. "Violet Blackburn," she replied, the formality of introduction providing momentary comfort. "Miss Blackburn, forgive my boldness, but Gold Creek isn't the safest place for a lady alone come nightfall." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with his next words. "The boarding house 3 doors down is run by Mrs. Peterson. She's a God-fearing widow who doesn't tolerate foolishness. If you need a place to stay—" "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Harlow," Violet said, her voice tight. "But I have matters well in hand." Grant's eyes flickered to her single carpetbag, then to the setting sun. "Of course," he said. "I shouldn't have presumed." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, and something in Violet crumpled. Perhaps it was hunger, exhaustion, or the overwhelming uncertainty of her situation, but tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. "Wait," she said, the word escaping before pride could cage it. Grant paused, turning back without judgment or triumph in his expression. Violet swallowed hard. "I find myself in unexpected circumstances. My correspondent was to meet me here, but sent word he won't be coming. The return fare to Philadelphia is beyond my current means." Instead of pity, a flash of anger crossed the cowboy's features. "He left you stranded? Without even meeting you?" The indignation on her behalf was strangely comforting. Apparently, the position he was counting on fell through. Along with his character, it seems. Grant's expression softened. "Miss Blackburn, I'd be honored to escort you to Mrs. Peterson's. She could use help with sewing and such. Might provide you a way to earn your return fare." It was a lifeline, offered without expectation. Violet hesitated only a moment before nodding. As they walked the dusty street toward the boarding house, Violet caught her reflection in a shop window, a young woman walking beside a cowboy, looking for all the world like she belonged in this harsh territory. The thought was as terrifying as it was unexpected. Mrs. Peterson proved to be exactly as Grant had described, stern but fair, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I can offer room and board in exchange for help with the laundry and mending," she said after hearing Violet's situation. "Pay isn't much, but it's honest work." "Thank you," Violet said, relief washing through her. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." As Mrs. Peterson showed her to a small but clean room upstairs, Violet heard Grant's voice below, speaking quietly to the older woman. When she returned downstairs, he was waiting by the door, hat in hand. "Mrs. Peterson says you can start tomorrow," he said. "I took the liberty of paying for your first week's board." Before she could protest, he continued, "Consider it a loan, if your pride requires it." "Mr. Harlow, I'll be back in town next Saturday," he said, settling his hat. "Perhaps by then you'll have decided if the West deserves another chance." His smile was quick but genuine. "Not all of us out here break our word, Miss Blackburn." With that, he was gone, leaving Violet standing in the doorway of a strange boarding house in a frontier town she'd never planned to stay in, wondering if the cruel twist of fate that stranded her might somehow lead to an unexpected path. The first week at Mrs. Peterson's passed in a blur of laundry, mending, and adjusting to frontier life. Violet's hands, once soft and suited only for pianoforte and embroidery, grew chapped and reddened. Yet with each passing day, a strange transformation began within her. The work was honest, the bed clean, and Mrs. Peterson's gruff kindness steadying. "You've got good hands," the older woman commented on Friday evening as Violet finished repairing a torn quilt. "Better than most who come through here." "My mother insisted on thorough training in household arts," Violet replied, "though I doubt she imagined me putting them to commercial use." Mrs. Peterson snorted. "Out here, skills matter more than pedigree. You'd do well to remember that." Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Violet told herself she wasn't watching for Grant Harlow, yet she found herself glancing toward the window each time hoofbeats sounded on the street. When he finally appeared, leading his buckskin horse rather than riding, she was kneading bread dough and couldn't immediately acknowledge the flutter in her chest. "Miss Blackburn," he greeted her, removing his hat as he entered the kitchen. "I'm pleased to see you looking well." He carried himself differently than Eastern men, she noted, a direct confidence born of capability rather than social position. His clothes were simple but clean, and the smile he offered seemed genuine. "Mr. Harlow," she acknowledged, "I've been meaning to thank you properly for your kindness last week." "No thanks necessary," he said. "How are you finding Gold Creek?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Peterson entered from the back door. "Grant Harlow, you're tracking dirt on my clean floor." "Apologies, Mrs. Peterson," he said with an easy grin that suggested this was a familiar exchange. "I've brought the mail from the ranch for posting." As they chatted, Violet learned that Grant frequently carried correspondence between the Double Rafter Ranch and town. When Mrs. Peterson stepped away, he turned back to Violet. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the general store," he said. "The town's growing lively with the cattle buyers in from Denver, and I thought, that is," he paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain, "it might be pleasant to walk in the afternoon sunshine." The invitation surprised her. "Mr. Harlow, while I appreciate the offer, just a walk," he clarified. "In broad daylight, with plenty of witnesses to preserve your reputation." His smile returned. "And perhaps you could tell me something of Philadelphia while we go." Against her better judgment, Violet found herself agreeing. An hour later, dressed in her one remaining good dress, a blue cotton that had seen better days but still held its shape, she walked beside Grant down the main street of Gold Creek. "Have you always worked at the Double Rafter?" she asked as they passed the bank. "Since I was 16, he replied. "My folks died of fever when I was 14. Ranch took me in when I had nowhere else to go." He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Old man Rafferty and his wife treated me like family. When he passed 3 years back, Mrs. Rafferty kept me on as foreman." "That's quite a responsibility for someone so young," Violet observed. Grant shrugged. "Out here, capability matters more than years. Ranch hands respect a man who works harder than they do and makes fair decisions." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you to consider California?" Violet hesitated before answering. "My parents died last year. My father's business failed, and the scandal of bankruptcy was too much for his heart. My mother followed within a month. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache. There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia except distant relatives who viewed me as a burden. So you agreed to marry a man you'd never met, Grant said without judgment. We corresponded for nearly 2 years, Violet said, feeling the need to defend her decision. His letters were thoughtful, educated. He described San Francisco as a place where the past couldn't follow you. She smiled ruefully. I suppose I should have questioned why he never sent a photograph. They paused outside the general store. Grant's expression had grown serious. For what it's worth, Miss Blackburn, his failure to honor his commitment reflects poorly only on him. Something warm unfurled in Violet's chest at his words. Thank you, Mr. Harlow. Inside the store, Grant greeted the proprietor warmly and introduced Violet. As they browsed the shelves, Violet became aware of curious glances from other customers. A young woman in the company of the double rafters foreman was evidently worthy of notice. Don't mind them, Grant murmured. News travels fast in small communities. And what news would that be? Violet asked, suddenly wary. That Mrs. Peterson has a new boarder from the East who sews like an angel and keeps to herself. He smiled. Nothing scandalous, I assure you. As they left the store, Grant carrying a small package of supplies, a commotion erupted further down the street. 3 cowboys emerged from the saloon, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. Their loud voices carried crude comments that made Violet flinch. Grant's posture changed instantly, shoulders squaring, expression hardening. Stay behind me, he said quietly. Harlow. One of the men called, spotting them. This the fancy Eastern girl everyone's talking about. Grant's voice remained even. Afternoon, Jackson. Suggest you and your friends head back to your outfit. Cattle buyer won't take kindly to finding his men drunk before sundown. The man named Jackson swayed slightly. Just being neighborly. Thought the lady might appreciate meeting men who know how to show a gal a proper time. The lady is under my protection, Grant said, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. And you're being disrespectful. Something in Grant's tone, or perhaps his stance, made Jackson reconsider. After a tense moment, he spat in the dirt. Come on, boys. Harlow's gone sweet on the Eastern Lily. Let's leave them to their tea party. When they'd staggered away, Violet released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you. Grant's expression remained troubled. I apologize for their behavior. Men like that give decent cowboys a bad name. You handled it well, Violet said. Without violence. Violence is rarely the answer, despite what dime novels might suggest. His expression softened. Though I admit, their implications about you tested my patience. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Violet found herself studying Grant with new eyes. He was nothing like the Eastern gentleman she'd known. His manners weren't polished, his clothes weren't fashionable. Yet there was an authenticity to him that felt refreshing after years of social performances. Will you be returning to Philadelphia soon? Grant asked as they neared Mrs. Peterson's. Violet hesitated. I've only managed to save a small portion of the fare. The autumn cattle drive starts next week, Grant said. I'll be gone for nearly a month, taking stock to the railhead at Cheyenne. He paused. I'd be honored if you'd allow me to write to you. The request caught her off guard. Mr. Harlow, just letters, he clarified quickly. Nothing presumptuous. But I've enjoyed our conversations, and I'd like to continue them, even at a distance. Violet thought of the 2 years of correspondence that had led her to disaster. Yet something about Grant's straightforward request felt different from the flowery persuasions she'd received before. I would like that, she found herself saying. Thank you. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then I'll write from the trail, Miss Blackburn. As promised, Grant departed with the cattle drive the following week. 3 days later, Mrs. Peterson handed Violet an envelope with unmistakable trail dust on its corners. Came with the supply wagon, the older woman said with a knowing look. Alone in her room that evening, Violet opened the letter with trembling fingers. Grant's handwriting was strong and clear, without flourishes. Miss Blackburn, the herd moves slower than this letter will travel, so we're still just 2 days north of Gold Creek. The younger steers are giving the boys trouble, but nothing we can't handle. The weather holds fair, though the nights grow cold. I find my thoughts returning to our conversation about expectations. You said you came west expecting civilization to have reached these territories. While our towns may lack Philadelphia's refinements, I wonder if I might show you something of the West's true wealth when I return. Not gold or cattle, but spaces so vast they humble a person, stars so bright they seem close enough to touch, and a freedom that can't be found in crowded cities. Respectfully yours, Grant Harlow. Violet read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it away. It contained no flowery declarations, no grand promises, just honest observations and a gentle invitation to see his world through different eyes. Over the next 3 weeks, more letters arrived. Grant described the drive with vivid simplicity, the challenges of river crossings, the quiet companionship around evening campfires, the endless skies that made men feel both insignificant and free. He asked about her days, her thoughts on Gold Creek, her memories of the East, genuine questions that suggested he valued her perspective. As October turned the cottonwoods golden, Violet found herself watching the northern trail with increasing frequency. Mrs. Peterson noticed, but said nothing, though her knowing look spoke volumes. The cattle drive returned on a Tuesday, the distant sound of bawling cattle and cowboys' calls drifting into town by mid-afternoon. Violet forced herself to focus on her work, ignoring the flutter in her stomach at each approaching hoofbeat. When Grant finally appeared at the boarding house door that evening, trail dust coating his clothes and a week's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw, Violet's carefully rehearsed greeting vanished from her mind. "Miss Blackburn," he said, hat in hand despite his obvious exhaustion. "I hope you received my letters." "I did," she replied, suddenly conscious of Mrs. Peterson's presence in the next room. They were most illuminating. Grant smiled, the weariness momentarily lifting from his features. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow evening. Once I've had a chance to make myself presentable." "I would like that," Violet said, surprising herself with how quickly the response came. His smile deepened. "Until tomorrow, then." After he left, Mrs. Peterson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "That young man rode straight here before even seeing to his own comfort," she observed. "After 3 weeks on the trail and a day's hard riding." "He was merely being polite," Violet said, though the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. Mrs. Peterson replied skeptically. "You'll want your blue dress pressed for tomorrow." The following evening, Violet found herself seated across from Grant in Gold Creek's only proper restaurant, a small establishment attached to the hotel. He'd cleaned up remarkably well, his hair still damp from bathing, his face clean-shaven, and his clothes fresh. "The drive was successful?" she asked after they'd ordered. "Very. Prices in Cheyenne were better than expected." He hesitated. "Mrs. Rafferty has asked me to consider expanding our operations. She's getting older and looking toward the future." "That sounds like a significant opportunity." Grant nodded. "It would mean more responsibility, but also—" He paused. "It would mean putting down more permanent roots, building something lasting." The conversation flowed easily as they ate, touching on books they'd both read, places they'd seen, and the approaching winter. Grant spoke of the ranch with obvious pride, describing the land in terms that made it sound like paradise rather than the harsh wilderness Violet had imagined. As they walked back toward the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Grant slowed his steps. "Miss Blackburn, Violet, may I speak frankly?" Her heart quickened at his use of her given name. "Of course. I know you came west under difficult circumstances, and your experience has given you every reason to distrust both this territory and its men." His voice was steady, his gaze direct. "But I find myself hoping you might consider staying in Colorado." "Mr. Harlow, Grant, please." "Grant," she corrected, the name feeling intimate on her lips. "I've only just begun saving for my return journey. And if you had reason to stay?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Violet, I realize we've known each other only briefly, but in that time, I've come to admire your strength, your resilience, your willingness to adapt to circumstances that would break lesser spirits." The night air felt suddenly insufficient for breathing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I would like the opportunity to court you properly." His voice remained steady, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Not through letters or hasty visits, but with time spent in each other's company, learning whether what I already feel might grow into something enduring." Violet's mind raced. She had come west expecting a husband, security, a new beginning, and found abandonment instead. Now this young cowboy, with his direct gaze and honest words, offered not immediate promises but the chance to build something slowly, genuinely. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Grant continued when she remained silent. "Only that you'll consider it." Under the vast Colorado sky, with the scent of pine in the air and the distant howl of a coyote emphasizing the wildness surrounding them, Violet made a decision that surprised her. "Yes," she said simply. Grant's expression shifted from hopeful to joyful. "Yes, yes, I'll allow you to court me." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Though I warn you, Mr. Harlow, I'm not easily impressed by mere frontier gallantry." His laugh was warm and genuine. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Blackburn." November brought the first serious snowfall, transforming Gold Creek into a winter landscape that Violet found unexpectedly beautiful. Grant visited twice weekly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book from the ranch's library, fresh-baked bread from the cook, once a small carved wooden bird that he admitted, with endearing embarrassment, to having made himself during evening hours. Their courtship progressed with a deliberate pace that gave Violet time to truly know the man behind the courtesy. She learned that he read voraciously during winter months, that he had a talent for sketching landscapes, that he treated the Mexican vaqueros on the ranch with the same respect he showed the American cowboys. When Christmas approached, Mrs. Peterson insisted Violet join her in decorating the boarding house. "No sense in moping about being away from Philadelphia," the older woman said practically. "Make new traditions." On Christmas Eve, Grant arrived with an invitation. "Mrs. Rafferty asked me to extend her invitation to you for Christmas dinner tomorrow," he said. "She's curious about the young woman who's captured my attention these past months." Violet hesitated. "The ranch is quite distant, isn't it?" "About 2 hours' ride," Grant confirmed. "I've brought the sleigh with good blankets. The snow's packed well enough for travel, and the weather report is favorable." The prospect of meeting Mrs. Rafferty, the woman who had essentially raised Grant from adolescence, was intimidating. Yet Violet found herself agreeing, curious about the ranch that figured so prominently in Grant's stories. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Grant arrived promptly at 10, driving a handsome sleigh pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Wrapped in heavy blankets beside him, Violet marveled at the winter landscape, pristine white fields stretching toward distant mountains, the sky an impossible blue. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "Different from Philadelphia's winters." Grant smiled. "Wait until you see the ranch in summer. Wildflowers covering the meadows, aspen leaves shimmering like silver coins." The easy way he included her in his vision of future seasons sent warmth through Violet despite the cold air. The Double Rafter Ranch appeared first as a collection of buildings nestled against the foothills, smoke rising from several chimneys. As they drew closer, Violet could see it was larger than she'd imagined. A substantial main house of hewn logs, a bunkhouse, barn, and several outbuildings, all well-maintained. Mrs. Rafferty proved to be a sprightly woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Violet of Mrs. Peterson. She welcomed Violet warmly, however, ushering them inside where a fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in. "So you're the young lady who's been occupying Grant's thoughts," Mrs. Rafferty said, studying Violet frankly. "He rides into town twice a week now, regular as clockwork. Never saw such dedication to mail delivery before." "Mrs. Rafferty," Grant protested, though his smile suggested this teasing was familiar. Christmas dinner was served at a long table in the dining room, with several ranch hands joining them. The food was plentiful: roast beef, potatoes, vegetables from the root cellar, and pies that Mrs. Rafferty announced with pride had been made from preserved summer berries. Violet observed the easy camaraderie between Grant and the men, noting how they deferred to him naturally, without resentment. He was clearly respected, not merely for his position but for his character. After the meal, while the hands retired to the bunkhouse with their gifts of tobacco and new gloves, Mrs. Rafferty insisted on showing Violet the ranch ledgers. "Grant tells me you have a head for figures," the older woman said, leading her to a study off the main room. "My father taught me bookkeeping," Violet admitted, "though I never expected to use the knowledge professionally." Mrs. Rafferty nodded approvingly. "Useful skill, especially out here where educated women are scarce. The ranch is growing, new breeding stock arriving in spring, additional grazing rights secured to the north." Too much for one old woman to manage. The implication was clear, though diplomatically unstated. Later, as Grant showed her the rest of the house, a surprisingly comfortable dwelling with actual glass windows and well-crafted furniture, Violet found herself imagining what it might be like to call such a place home. In the main parlor, Grant paused beside a small table where several framed photographs stood. He picked up one showing a stern-faced couple. "My parents," he explained. "This is all I have left of them." Violet studied the photograph with interest. "You have your father's brow and your mother's eyes." "They were good people," Grant said softly. "Hardworking. They taught me that a person's word is their bond." He set the photograph down carefully. "When they died, I thought I'd lost my chance at family. Mrs. Rafferty showed me otherwise." In that moment, standing in the warm parlor with snow falling gently outside the windows, Violet understood something profound about Grant Harlow. His directness, his reliability, his careful approach to their courtship, all stemmed from a man who knew the value of chosen family and kept promises. Before they departed, Mrs. Rafferty pressed a small package into Violet's hands. "For you," she said. "Open it when you get back to town." The return journey passed in comfortable conversation, the winter dusk falling early around them. When Grant helped Violet down from the sleigh at Mrs. Peterson's door, his hands lingered at her waist. "Merry Christmas, Violet," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Grant," she replied, suddenly aware of how close they stood. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but he simply smiled and stepped back respectfully. "May I call tomorrow?" "I would like that," she said, realizing how true the words were. Later, alone in her room, Violet opened Mrs. Rafferty's gift, a beautiful hand-knitted shawl in soft blue wool with a note tucked inside. "Winter nights get cold out here. A woman needs warmth. Welcome to Colorado, my dear." The simple acceptance brought unexpected tears to Violet's eyes. Perhaps the West wasn't the hostile wilderness she'd feared. Perhaps, like Grant, it simply took time to reveal its true character. January brought bitter cold and the revelation that would change everything. The telegram arrived for Violet on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Mrs. Peterson's by the station master's boy with an air of importance. Violet opened it with trembling fingers, recognizing the Philadelphia law office's name immediately. "Miss Blackburn stop regret to inform father's former partner found deceased stop left substantial bequest to you stop $5,000 plus property interest stop require your signature Philadelphia stop passage arranged February 1st stop reply soonest stop $5,000. A fortune, enough to establish herself comfortably anywhere, Philadelphia, San Francisco, even here in Colorado should she choose." The irony wasn't lost on her. The very financial security she'd sought through marriage now offered independently, requiring only her return east to claim it. When Grant called that evening, Violet showed him the telegram without comment. He read it carefully, his expression revealing nothing. "This is wonderful news," he said finally, handing it back. "You're a wealthy woman, Violet." "Yes," she agreed, studying his face. "It changes everything." "Does it?" His voice remained even, but she detected the tension beneath. "I'll need to return to Philadelphia to sign the necessary papers," she said. "The lawyer has arranged passage for February 1st. Grant nodded slowly. "Of course. You have obligations to attend to." "Grant," she began, uncertain how to continue. The inheritance offered freedom she hadn't dared imagine, freedom to choose her own path, without financial pressure. Yet the timing felt cruel, coming just as her feelings for Grant had deepened into something undeniable. "You should know," he said carefully, "that my feelings for you haven't changed. But I understand that this changes your circumstances significantly. You have options now that weren't available before." "I need time to think," Violet admitted. "This is unexpected." "Of course." He rose to leave, his movements stiff. At the door he paused. "I'll respect whatever decision you make, Violet. But know that what I offered wasn't dependent on your circumstances." After he left, Violet sat by the window for a long time, watching snow fall in the glow of street lamps. Philadelphia represented civilization, culture, comfort, everything she'd missed these past months. Yet the thought of returning permanently left her feeling strangely hollow. Over the next week, Grant maintained his distance, calling only once with the formal courtesy that had marked their earliest interactions. The withdrawal hurt more than Violet had anticipated, though she understood his pride wouldn't allow him to press his suit against her newfound financial independence. Mrs. Peterson, never one to mince words, confronted Violet directly as she packed for the journey east. "So you're running back to Philadelphia now that you've got money," the older woman said, folding arms across her chest. "I have business to attend to," Violet replied defensively. "Humph, business is one thing. Staying gone is another." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened slightly. "That young man has been walking around town like he's lost his best horse and favorite dog in the same day." "I haven't made any decisions about returning," Violet protested. "Haven't you? Seems to me you've been looking for a way back east since the day you arrived. Now you've got it, along with a reason to feel righteous about leaving." Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "Just make sure you're running towards something, not away from it." The words stayed with Violet through her final preparations. The night before her departure, she wrote a letter to Grant, trying to explain her confused feelings, her need for time, her promise to write. The words felt inadequate, but she sealed the envelope anyway, arranging for Mrs. Peterson to deliver it after she'd gone. Grant didn't come to the station to see her off. Violet told herself it was better this way, cleaner, less painful for both of them. As the train pulled away from Gold Creek's small depot, she watched the frontier town recede, wondering why triumph felt so much like loss. Philadelphia in February was gray and sooty. The snow turned to dirty slush in the streets. The familiar bustle of the city that had once felt exciting now seemed merely chaotic after Colorado's expansive spaces. The legal matters proceeded efficiently. Mr. Whitcomb, her father's former partner, had indeed left Violet a substantial sum, along with interests in several successful businesses. When the final papers were signed, she found herself in possession of more money than she'd ever expected to control. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Blackburn," the lawyer observed as she prepared to leave his office. "With these resources, you could establish yourself quite comfortably here in Philadelphia. Perhaps even make an advantageous marriage." Violet nodded politely, though the suggestion left her cold. In the weeks since her return, numerous acquaintances had suddenly remembered her existence, extending invitations that had been conspicuously absent during her time of financial difficulty. At night, in the comfortable hotel room she'd secured, Violet found herself missing the sound of wind across the Colorado plains, the brilliant stars unobscured by city smoke, and the simple honesty of a young rancher who had offered his heart without calculation. Grant's letters arrived regularly, as promised, straightforward accounts of ranch activities, weather reports, news of Mrs. Rafferty, and the hands. He never pressured, never pleaded, but between the carefully neutral lines, Violet sensed his continued hope. One evening in late March, as Philadelphia prepared for spring, Violet found herself at the theater with Edward Carrington, son of her father's former business associate. Handsome, cultured, and clearly interested in her newly secure financial position, Edward represented everything she had once valued in a potential husband. "I've secured box seats for the opera next Friday," he mentioned during the intermission. "I would be honored if you would accompany me, Miss Blackburn." Violet smiled automatically, the social graces returning with practiced ease. "That's very kind, Mr. Carrington. Please, call me Edward." His smile was practiced, confident. "I feel we've become quite well acquainted these past weeks." As he continued outlining his plans for their future engagements, Violet found her attention drifting. She thought of Grant, not in a theater box but on horseback, silhouetted against the Colorado sky, his laughter genuine and unforced. "Miss Blackburn, have I said something amiss?" Violet refocused on Edward's concerned expression. "I apologize, Mr. Carrington. I was momentarily distracted." She hesitated, then continued with sudden clarity. "I'm afraid I must decline your invitation. In fact, I'll be returning to Colorado within the week." Edward's surprise was evident. "Colorado? But surely there's nothing for a woman of your standing in such uncivilized territory." "On the contrary," Violet replied, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she spoke the truth she'd been avoiding. "I believe everything that matters to me awaits me there." The decision, once made, brought an overwhelming sense of rightness. Violet arranged her affairs with newfound purpose, investing in several reliable Eastern businesses that would provide regular income without requiring her presence, and converting the remainder to drafts on a Denver bank. She wrote to Mrs. Peterson, announcing her return and requesting her room be held, then penned a short note to Grant. Arriving Gold Creek April 12th, matters concluded satisfactorily. Much to discuss. The westbound journey felt different this time, not an escape or desperate gamble, but a deliberate choice. When the train pulled into Gold Creek Station on a brilliant spring afternoon, Violet gathered her belongings with steady hands. The platform was empty save for one figure. Grant Harlow stood at the far end, his posture straight, expression guarded. He wore his good shirt and had clearly taken extra care with his appearance, though his nervousness was evident in the way he shifted his weight. Violet approached slowly, suddenly uncertain despite her weeks of certainty. What if he'd reconsidered? What if her departure had damaged their connection beyond repair? "Miss Blackburn," he said formally as she reached him. "Welcome back to Colorado." "Thank you for meeting me," she replied, studying his face for clues to his feelings. "Mrs. Peterson received your letter. She sent me to fetch you." His tone remained carefully neutral. "Your room is prepared." An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the easy conversation they'd once shared. Finally, Grant cleared his throat. "I hope your business in Philadelphia was concluded successfully?" "It was." Violet took a deep breath. "I've come into a considerable inheritance. Enough to establish myself anywhere I might choose." Grant nodded, his expression still unreadable. "And you've chosen to return to Gold Creek?" "Temporarily," Violet said, watching his face fall slightly before adding, "while I decide where to build my permanent home." He reached for her carpetbag. "Mrs. Peterson will be glad to see you. The town's been quiet in your absence." As they walked toward the waiting buggy, Violet gathered her courage. "And you, Mr. Harlow? Are you glad to see me?" Grant stopped, finally meeting her eyes directly. "Violet, you must know that I've thought of little else but your return. But I won't presume upon your friendship now that your circumstances have changed so dramatically." "My circumstances have indeed changed," she acknowledged. "I'm no longer dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill. I can make choices based solely on what I truly want." Hope flickered in his eyes. "And what is it you want, Violet?" "The same thing I wanted before I left," she said simply. "A chance to build something meaningful. To be valued for who I am, not what I bring to a marriage." She paused. "The only difference is now I can offer more than just myself to the man I choose." "The man you choose doesn't need your money," Grant said, his voice low but intense. "He only needs you." The walls between them crumbled in that moment. Grant stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "I've missed you every day," he confessed. "The ranch, the town, everything seemed diminished without you in it." "I tried to convince myself that Philadelphia was where I belonged," Violet admitted. "But my heart kept returning here, to Colorado, to Gold Creek." She squeezed his hands. "To you, Violet Blackburn," Grant said solemnly, "I love you. I loved you when you had nothing but the clothes on your back, and I love you now that you're a wealthy woman. If you'll have me, I want to spend my life proving that your journey west wasn't a mistake after all." Joy bubbled up within her. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you bought my dinner at Mrs. Peterson's and asked nothing in return." His smile transformed his face. "May I court you properly now, without reservations or uncertainties between us?" "Yes," Violet said. "Though I warn you, Mr. Harlow, my standards have risen considerably. I now expect nothing less than a lifetime of honesty, partnership, and adventure. I believe I can meet those terms, Miss Blackburn." His eyes crinkled with happiness. "Shall we seal the agreement?" When he kissed her, there on the dusty street with curious townspeople watching from windows, Violet knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in Philadelphia's drawing rooms or even in Gold Creek itself, but in the arms of a man who valued her courage as much as her beauty, her mind as much as her heart. Summer transformed the Colorado landscape into a riot of wildflowers and verdant grass. The Double Rafter Ranch flourished under joint management, Mrs. Rafferty overseeing household matters, Grant directing the cattle operations, and Violet bringing her organizational skills to the business aspects. Their courtship progressed with deliberate joy, rides across the sprawling property, picnics beside mountain streams, evenings spent planning their future together. With Violet's capital investments and Grant's ranching expertise, the Double Rafter expanded operations, purchasing adjacent land and improving their breeding stock. On a perfect July evening, With sunset painting the mountains gold and purple, Grant led Violet to a hillside overlooking the ranch. A small cabin stood there, newly built, with a broad porch facing the valley. "What's this?" Violet asked, surprised. "A wedding present," Grant replied, suddenly looking nervous. "If you'll accept it, along with my hand." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box containing a simple diamond ring. "I've spoken with Mrs. Rafferty. She's ready to formally deed me my portion of the ranch as promised when I came of age. With your business sense and my knowledge of cattle, we could build something extraordinary together." Tears filled Violet's eyes as she looked from the ring to the cabin to the thriving ranch below. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Is that a yes?" Grant asked, his voice hopeful. "Yes," Violet said, her heart full. 1,000 times yes. They were married in September beneath an archway of aspen branches just beginning to turn golden. Mrs. Peterson stood proudly beside Mrs. Rafferty, both women having claimed honorary mother status. The entire town turned out, along with ranchers from miles around, all curious to witness the union of the Eastern heiress and the respected young foreman. "Who would have thought," Mrs. Peterson whispered to Mrs. Rafferty during the reception, "that being stranded at our little depot would lead to this?" Mrs. Rafferty nodded sagely. Sometimes the journey takes unexpected turns. At sunset, Grant led his bride to a waiting carriage decorated with flowers and ribbons. As they prepared to depart for their small cabin and their first night as husband and wife, Violet looked back at the gathering, the community that had become her own through chance, choice, and love. "Happy?" Grant asked softly, his arms secure around her waist. "Completely," Violet answered truthfully. "Who would have thought that when my journey west seemed to end in disaster at Gold Creek's depot, it was actually just beginning?" Grant kissed her beneath the golden Colorado sky. "Your journey ends with me," he promised, echoing the words he'd spoken months ago. "And our life together is just beginning." As they drove away toward their new home, Violet Harlow knew with perfect certainty that being left alone at that depot had been not a tragedy, but a blessing. The first step on a path leading exactly where she was meant to be.